Hello, my name is Cüneyt Çakırlar, Associate Professor of Film and Visual Culture at the Nottingham Trent University. In this talk, I will briefly discuss the post-millennial emergence of djinn-themed horror movies in popular Turkish cinema. In the project I have recently completed for the British Academy, I studied these films, their significance in contemporary Turkish media cultures, as well as their belonging to a more international revival of folk horror in contemporary cinema. Although most of these horror movies have been considered as trashy, cheap productions which shouldn't be taken seriously, they got more and more visible and popular, both at the Turkish box office and in their digital long tail of global distribution on over-the-top streaming platforms including Amazon Prime, Netflix and YouTube. Today, I will focus on the local aspects only. These films' engagement with national political context, their style and narrative, and finally, their reception by particular demographic groups. Investing in the figure of the jinn, which originates from Anatolian folklore, Turkic shamanism, and Islamic mythology, these films tell stories of witchcraft, black magic, demonic possession, and exorcism. Different from other spectral beings, jinns occupy a special liminal status in Islam. They are of the earth, yet they are unseen on it. Various Quranic verses state that they have free will, and among them are both those who have submitted to God and those who are evil. However, in Turkish horror cinema particularly, the jinns are represented as beings with malicious criminal intent that antagonize marriages and families. They are often provoked by those who summon them to commit malicious, evil, murderous acts. These films show the intense rituals of black magic, büyü in Turkish, summoning jinns to work for ill-willed humans. In Islam, the Quran acknowledges the existence of jinns, yet contacting them and performing black magic is associated with worshipping the devil. Black magic and any interaction with the jinns is seen as a haram act or a sinful transgression. What interested me with regard to these jinn-themed horror films was precisely their investment in the paranormal phenomena in the Islamic veneer, which are common folk knowledge, part of what we may call lived religion or popular Islam in this case, yet always marginalized in the highly regulated notion of the official state-endorsed Sunni Islam in Turkey. These type of stories about black magic contradict the official Sunni Muslim orthodoxy. So they contradict not only the legacy of modern secular republicanism, but also the new status quo that is the current President Recep Tayyip Erdogan's new Turkey, shaped by neoliberal Islam and an ethos of pious citizenship defined through the good, conscientious Muslim family. My study proposed 3 areas of focus for the analysis of these jinn-themed horror films: Turkish socio-political context, film form, style and narrative, and finally, the reception of these films by particular audience groups. First, socio-political context. The reproductive family has a constitutive role in the history of Turkish politics across the secular republican and Islamic governances. Yet its ideological construction shifted with the President Recep Tayyip Erdogan's rise to power in early 2000s. The political theorist Ece Öztan notes that, quote, family is an important metaphor and an operational ground for Erdogan's neoliberal conservative hegemony, unquote. Inevitably, this moral idealization of family-centered cultural politics created a societal anxiety. Investing in families in crisis, intoxicated by the jinns, which are called up by the vengeful members of the family to curse other members of the same kin, these horror films' affective engagement with horror is, I argue, shaped by this anxiety contemporary Turkish politics trigger through its instrumentalization of family and family values across the secular versus Muslim divides. You see similar spectacles of families in crises in other contemporary genre formations in mainstream Turkish media, such as Turkish soap operas and women's daytime reality TV shows. And interestingly, the motifs in each genre when expressing the horrific incidents happening in a family resonates with one another. Most horror movies, for example, use the excessive styles of Turkish soap operas and women's reality TV shows. Second component of my analysis was on style and narrative. These films often follow a narrative formula. They start with a ritual of black magic. We are then invited to a Turkish family household where paranormal incidents start to occur. Experiencing the extraordinary events, the family members first struggle to believe in what is causing these incidents. Yet, when they are finally convinced to ask for help from a hoca, hidden amulets are discovered in their house, which are the indicators of the black magic targeting the family. So the hoca undertakes rituals of breaking the curse to exorcise to the house and the possessed family members from the jinns that were summoned through these amulets. The medium's so-called decoding of the amulet also reveals the origins of the curse, which often leads the narrative to a village that one of the family members are originally from. The story is then followed by the journey back to where it all started. The journey to the creepy villages in Turkish provinces provides the characters with a resolution. The person who practiced the black magic is revealed after the buried past secrets about these villages are discovered. These non-urban locations, taşra in Turkish language, are used to amplify class antagonisms. Antagonisms between white, secular middle-class domesticity and the forgotten or abandoned villages of provincial Turkey, which resonates with the dominant representations of provincial Anatolian villages as sites of state manipulation, ethnic conflicts, heterodoxy, and corruption, not only in mainstream media, but also in art house filmmaking from Turkey. In addition to the expressive use of mise-en-scène, the rituals of black magic and the scenes with hojas who discover and attempt to break the spell in the haunted houses operate as spectacles that connect these films with Turkish audiences through the familiar culturally specific iconography of amulets, rituals, and mythology. These spectacles also authenticate these films as Turkish or Muslim horror for international audiences, including those who consume horror media that work in similar fields of religion, folklore, syncretisms. In most djinn-horror movies, the spectacle undermines the narrative resolution. The revelation of the actual perpetrator of black magic takes place in the very final sequences of the film. So the final resolution is presented in an overwhelmingly accelerated and intense set of sequences, which makes the diegetic closure absurd and almost irrelevant to the value of the djinn spectacle experienced throughout the film. I thus argue that djinn horror cannot easily be reduced to a coherent ideological standpoint. Beyond the secular versus pious Muslim binary, which is often used to characterize the political polarization of Turkish society, every party, everyone is suspect in these movies. The reactionary versus progressive binary proposed by the film scholar Robin Wood's seminal study on American horror cinema in the 70s is not applicable here either. And perhaps it is the ideological ambivalence that makes them more powerful and more effective. And finally, who watches these films in Turkey? As part of this project, I had the chance to interview a number of filmmakers affiliated with these Turkish horror productions. I've asked them to reflect on their practice and to locate this emerging genre within the national cinema sector and the socio-political context. One of the most surprising findings was that all my interviewees were very aware of for whom or for which demographic groups they were making these films. Relying on the box office statistics, they mentioned the exactly same demographics. The districts which almost all my interviewees had mentioned are where the working class and the aspirational lower middle class communities live, with the majority being pious, conservative Muslim families. I have checked the voting behavior in these regions and noticed that all the districts mentioned by the filmmakers belong to the swing states. In the 2014 general elections, the electorate voted overwhelmingly for Erdogan's Justice and Development Party. However, in the latest mayoral elections and the general election, Erdogan's party has lost most of their seats in these councils to the Republican opposition. My question is, what does this electoral loss say to us? Is Erdogan's politics of raising a new pious generation of devout Muslims losing its currency among the population? Perhaps for the sake of an optimistic conclusion to this talk, I say I see the pious youth raised in conservative Muslim households, where I was brought up in the 80s and the 90s, have a more pragmatic relationship with politics and religion. If much of the horror spectatorship occurs in these areas where there is a clear discontent with the status quo of neoliberal Islam, then these younger audiences have at least the resilience to confront the toxic relations of power, property, and family, and be entertained by their representations through horror media. Djinn movies and their audiences reveal the societal drive to move on from this seriously divided new Turkey and to imagine a citizenship going beyond the superficial secular versus pious binary.